The days following the Denmark UFO outbreak were cloaked in a silence so thick it felt manufactured. What had begun as a strange military report from Aalborg Air Base had spread like wildfire across encrypted message boards and late-night radio shows, but then, almost overnight, the chatter stopped. No more leaks, no more blurry images from radar screens. It was as if the story had been swallowed by something far larger than censorship. The Danish Meteorological Institute issued a vague statement. Atmospheric disturbances recorded near the Jutland Peninsula are being analyzed. There is no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. Yet, behind closed doors, the same institute had evacuated half its staff after several technicians reported unexplained interference, not just in their instruments, but in their minds. One of them, a 28-year-old analyst named Freya Lund, was found days later wandering aimlessly along the E45 highway, dehydrated, barefoot, and mumbling a single phrase over and over. They walked through the static. News outlets avoided her story. Her hospital records disappeared from the public registry within 24 hours. But locals in northern Denmark, particularly near the fjords around Frederikshavn, began whispering about lights returning to the sky. Not fast-moving meteors, but deliberate, hovering formations that pulsated in sequence. Fishermen out at sea described columns descending into the water at night, leaving a sizzling mist that drifted across the waves like burnt fog. It didn't take long before people began to vanish. The first to go missing was a family of 4 in Vendsyssel. Their farmhouse found abandoned with dinner still on the table. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, just an overwhelming electromagnetic residue that fried the responders' body cams and erased nearby phone footage. The police sealed off the area, calling it a radiation hazard. But the hazmat suits told another story. Every piece of glass in the house, from windows to drinking cups, had warped, as though softened by immense heat. Yet the walls remained cold to the touch. 2 days later, another disappearance. A cargo driver, Jesper Holm, reported seeing a metallic shimmer hovering above the road near the Limfjord Bridge. Dashcam footage recovered from his truck. S-Cloud backup showed a white burst of static at 2:13 a.m., followed by complete blackness. The truck was found idling by the roadside the next morning, lights on, engine running, but no driver. The Danish government responded quietly. No press conferences, no military mobilization visible to the public, but radar data from NATO's European Command told a different story. Surveillance satellites recorded multiple low-orbit anomalies, passing directly over Denmark between midnight and 4 a.m., all traveling at speeds exceeding 40,000 kilometers per hour before halting, completely stationary, for minutes at a time. Such halts were impossible under known physics. And yet, the data logs were authentic. A classified report, leaked briefly onto a private research server in Germany, contained an image from a high-altitude recon drone. A hexagonal object emerging from cloud cover, partially transparent, with distinct luminescent panels rotating around its core. The metadata timestamp placed it over Denmark's western coast just hours before the Holm disappearance. Within an hour of upload, the file vanished, the IP address scrubbed. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens were left with fragments, voices on late-night forums, intercepted radio transmissions, and shaky mobile clips showing distortions in the night sky. The government called them hoaxes, but those who lived near Aalborg and Thisted told another story. They claimed the air itself began to hum after midnight. Dogs barked uncontrollably. Lights flickered in synchronized pulses. And then, silence. One chilling pattern began to emerge. Each disappearance was preceded by a blackout of communication networks within a 10-kilometer radius. Cell towers malfunctioned, power grids flickered, and all wireless signals spiked with untraceable noise. The interference resembled a kind of directed pulse, short, rhythmic, and precisely timed. Some believed it was a scanning signal. Others thought it was a form of transmission, a kind of selection process. In the small town of Lookin, an elderly couple described how the sea glowed faintly blue one night, like plankton, except the glow moved against the tide. They watched from their window until the glow began to rise, lifting from the surface in tendrils of light that coalesced into a shape, almost humanoid, before vanishing into thin air. The next morning, their neighbor, a retired fisherman named Eric Madsen, was gone. His boat was still moored. He said it shimmered like glass filled with lightning, and when it disappeared, every compass in his car spun wildly for 10 full minutes. His body cam footage was confiscated immediately. Internationally, intelligence chatter began to spike. France's CNS, Germany's DLR, and NASA all logged the same anomaly: an unknown structure orbiting Earth's upper atmosphere for precisely 13 minutes before slipping into solar alignment. It reflected no radar, emitted no heat signature, and appeared to fold in and out of visible light. Analysts privately referred to it as Object R09. Dr. Ilara Quinn, the same astrophysicist who analyzed the solar footage months earlier, appeared in an unlisted video leaked on a private Discord server for researchers. Her face was pale, exhausted. "The pattern is repeating," she said softly. "Whatever passed near the sun, it's here now. It's using our magnetic field like scaffolding." Satellite imagery from the European Space Agency later revealed faint, concentric depressions in the soil where disappearances occurred. Perfect circles, 3 meters wide, burned with microscopic glass beads consistent with extreme heat. But no fire had been reported, no noise, no witnesses. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the phenomena stopped. For 5 full nights, no lights were seen, no vanishings reported. Power systems stabilized. But in the quiet hours after midnight, fishermen still swear they can hear a low metallic hum echoing from the horizon. They say it's coming closer each night. And far inland, where the first vanishings occurred, cell service occasionally spikes with an unfamiliar frequency. one that doesn't belong to any known provider. When decoded, it plays a single repeating sound, a slow, mechanical pulse. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. As if something alive is still breathing just above the clouds. When the Aarhus weather balloon's feed went dark, most assumed it was a simple technical fault. But within the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt, Germany, a single technician noticed something impossible. The balloon's telemetry hadn't failed. It had been overridden. The data packets had been intercepted mid-transmission and redirected to an unknown IP address located somewhere north of the Arctic Circle. That location, according to NATO mapping data, didn't exist. 2 hours later, all digital traces of the balloon's flight were wiped from Denmark's meteorological servers. The only surviving record was a backup copy on a private hard drive belonging to senior researcher Dr. Henrik Voss, who had manually mirrored the feed moments before it went offline. When he opened the file, his screen filled with static. And then, for just 3 frames, something emerged from the interference. It was the same black arc the balloon had captured before losing signal. But this time, it wasn't motionless. It was turning, slowly, deliberately. Along its surface, hundreds of lights pulsed in synchronized rows, cycling in precise rhythm. Voss enhanced the frames, expecting simple reflection patterns. What he discovered instead was structure. Panels, channels, and a repeating formation like a circular lattice of glass-like surfaces refracting sunlight. He froze when he realized those lights weren't reflecting the sun. They were producing light of their own. That was the night Dr. Voss went missing. His car was found in a wooded area west of Aarhus, still running, headlights cutting into the mist. On the passenger seat lay his phone, locked on a text message draft that read, "It's not a craft. It's..." The message ended there. No one ever found out what word came next. By the following week, small-scale power disruptions returned across northern Jutland. But this time, the blackouts followed a pattern. Narrow elliptical zones that lasted exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds each. In each zone, electronic devices failed completely, and witnesses reported hearing what they described as a heartbeat under the ground. Emergency teams investigating the first zone near Brunderslev discovered something extraordinary. A thin layer of glass fused into the soil, arranged in concentric circles exactly 12 meters wide. The center glowed faintly blue under UV light. When samples were sent to the Technical University of Denmark for analysis, the results baffled every material scientist involved. The fused silica had isotopic signatures not found on Earth. That report, too, disappeared within hours of being filed. Only one line from the internal memo survived, shared anonymously online. Thermal origin impossible. Energy source unknown. Sample exhibits persistent internal motion. Persistent internal motion. It was as if the material was alive. Meanwhile, on the civilian side, vanishings continued to escalate. Entire neighborhoods began reporting missing residents without any trace. Doors locked from inside, televisions still playing, meals half-eaten. It wasn't random. It followed the same pattern as the blackout zones. A journalist named Sophie Nygaard began connecting the dots. Working independently from Copenhagen, she started mapping every disappearance alongside every recorded power disruption. Her resulting map looked like chaos until she noticed something chilling. The points weren't random scatter. They formed a perfect spiral, expanding outward from the original outbreak zone near Aalborg. Each new event aligned with the Fibonacci ratio, nature's pattern, or something mimicking it. Sophie took her findings to the Danish Security and Intelligence Service, PET. She was dismissed immediately, told to stop chasing internet hysteria. The next day, her apartment was ransacked. Her hard drives gone, her phone dead. But Sophie, being cautious, had mailed a printed copy of her research to a friend. A data archivist named Emil Sørensen, working at a radio observatory in Norway. That package arrived 2 days later. By then, Sophie had vanished too. Emil, desperate to make sense of her disappearance, began reviewing archived radio signals from the nights surrounding the vanishings. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. Each time a blackout occurred, an identical signal spike appeared on low-frequency bands, far below normal communication ranges, so low they bordered on seismic resonance. The signal wasn't random static. It had structure. When slowed down, it formed a pattern of pulses. Short, long, long, short, repeating endlessly. Emil converted the waveform into audio and played it through studio monitors. The sound was unsettling, a slow, deep vibration, like metal groaning underwater. But when he overlaid several recordings together, he realized the pulses weren't noise. They were coordinates. Each cluster of tones matched exact latitude and longitude positions across Denmark. And at the center of them all, the Aalborg Air Base. When Emil tried to contact anyone at the base, he was met with silence. Every number led to automated messages. The official line was that Aalborg was under temporary maintenance due to atmospheric contamination. But leaked images told a different story. Photographs of scorched earth, shredded vehicles, and what appeared to be melted asphalt spreading outward from hangar structures. An anonymous pilot later claimed he had flown over the base at 30,000 feet and seen a dark hole in the clouds directly above it, perfectly circular, like something burned through the sky itself. Within days, NATO command issued a no-fly zone over northern Denmark. Meanwhile, a growing movement of amateur researchers began tracking the frequency Emil discovered, referring to it online as the pulse. A Reddit thread called Are the Danish Signal became a hub for live monitoring of EM spikes. Thousands tuned in nightly to hear the strange rhythmic thump, which sometimes intensified or faded as if reacting to the listeners themselves. One night, a user posted a live feed claiming the pulse had changed. Instead of the usual rhythm, it began forming a more complex sequence, a binary string. When decoded, it produced a single phrase in ASCII text: "We are here." The post vanished minutes later. So did the user's account. Around this time, multiple eyewitnesses began reporting strange figures near blackout sites. Not humanoid in the conventional sense, more like silhouettes of light and shadow, flickering as though out of sync with the surrounding world. One farmer near Hjørring described watching one of these figures approach his barn. He said it didn't walk, it phased, like an image flickering through frames of film. When it stopped, his tractor's lights exploded in a shower of sparks. The next morning, only an ashen imprint remained where the figure had stood, a perfectly circular burn pattern etched into the gravel. Local law enforcement began confiscating recordings, citing digital interference hazards, but fragments kept leaking through. In one clip, a figure stands motionless in a field as mist drifts around it. Then, for a fraction of a second, its body splits, fracturing into mirrored copies before collapsing into nothingness. Forensic experts who analyzed the video concluded the distortion wasn't digital artifacting, it was spatial refraction. Whatever those entities were, they weren't fully in our dimension. Behind closed doors, governments began to panic. Satellite networks across Europe recorded a new anomaly, a series of hexagonal shadows moving along the upper atmosphere, arranged in a grid-like formation. They were transparent most of the time, but occasionally shimmered as if catching sunlight. The grid stretched across half of Scandinavia. In a declassified audio log from the European Space Council, an unidentified voice can be heard saying, "They're not ships, they're segments of something larger." That phrase spread across underground forums like wildfire. Segments of something larger. Meanwhile, in an abandoned farmhouse near Løkken, the same village where fishermen first saw the blue glow, a local radio enthusiast named Rasmus Kold was tinkering with an old shortwave receiver when he stumbled upon something extraordinary. While tuning through interference, he caught a repeating transmission buried beneath normal noise. A voice, distorted, mechanical, but unmistakably human. It said, "Frequency lock achieved. Phase 2 underway. Maintain veil integrity. Human replication at 47%. Then, silence. Rasmus tried to replay it, but the message never returned. When he posted his recording online, it was immediately flagged and removed for violation of data integrity. The next day, his workshop burned to the ground in what police called a faulty generator fire. As the disappearances reached triple digits, the Danish Prime Minister addressed the nation for the first time since the outbreak. The speech was calm, measured, and deeply unsettling. She denied the existence of extraterrestrial threats, claiming all disappearances were isolated incidents under investigation. But analysts noticed something strange. When the broadcast was replayed frame by frame, the background behind her, supposedly a live Parliament hall, flickered once, revealing for less than half a second a completely different backdrop. A blank white chamber filled with faint geometric symbols glowing faintly blue. Viewers described feeling physically sick watching the glitch. Meanwhile, Emil, the last remaining civilian who had direct access to the pulse data, vanished from his lab in Norway. His workstation was left running, streaming a final message through an encrypted audio file. It was a repeating voice pattern, digitally altered but still human enough to decipher. They are synchronizing with us. The frequency is their bridge. When it completes, there will be no more distinction between observer and observed. The file name was a single word: assimilation. Then, as if scripted by something beyond human comprehension, the pulse stopped. Every receiver, every radar, every audio file went silent at exactly 03:33 a.m. UTC on October 12th. For 72 hours, nothing happened. No vanishings, no anomalies. The world exhaled. Then came the light. Satellite footage from the European Meteorological Network captured a massive energy surge erupting from the North Sea. The source was deep beneath the surface. A pulse of ultraviolet radiation that expanded outward in a perfect sphere before vanishing completely. Moments later, the pulse returned. But now, it wasn't coming from space. It was coming from Earth. And within that signal, scientists found something impossible: embedded vocal harmonics matching human DNA resonance patterns. The same pattern detected in missing civilians' biometric data. By the end of that week, Copenhagen's skyline shimmered faintly under a strange atmospheric distortion. Locals described it as the air itself bending. The frequency was everywhere now, in phone static, power lines, even in the low hum of refrigerators, as if the world was slowly tuning into a new signal. And something on the other side was finally answering back. When the light erupted from beneath the North Sea, few understood what they were truly witnessing. Satellite footage showed the event as a brief ultraviolet bloom, but eyewitnesses along Denmark's western coast described something more disturbing: a silent explosion of colorless light that turned night into a hollow, translucent day. Birds fell from the sky. Dogs barked frantically, refusing to go outdoors for hours. In some towns, Clocks stopped completely for 3 minutes and 33 seconds. The same number sequence that had haunted the blackouts for months. It was no ordinary energy pulse. It was a signal rebirth. Within hours, scientists across Europe began reporting strange interferences in their instruments. Magnetometers, weather radars, and even seismographs showed synchronized fluctuations, all oscillating at precisely 14.6 Hertz. That frequency didn't correspond to any known natural phenomenon. It was as if the Earth itself had begun to vibrate in response to something hidden deep beneath the sea. In Copenhagen, the government held an emergency session under heavy secrecy. Ministers, defense officials, and scientific advisors gathered inside the old Cold War-era command bunker known as Reagan Vest, located beneath a limestone hill near Roldskov. Inside, under layers of concrete and steel, the meeting began with one question that no one could answer. Is this invasion or integration? No one spoke for several seconds. Then Defense Minister Poul Enevoldsen stood, placing a classified folder on the table. On its cover was a single word printed in bold red type: Helios. Project Helios, he explained, had begun quietly 4 months earlier, shortly after the first power anomalies in Aalborg. It was not a new initiative. It was an activation, the resurrection of an older contingency plan originally drafted in 1978 under NATO's Solar Containment Directive. Back then, Helios was designed to respond to unknown non-nuclear energy threats. But no one had ever expected to use it. Until now, Helios's objective was simple in theory, but monumental in execution: to detect, contain, and neutralize any non-terrestrial frequency interacting with human biological systems. To accomplish this, Denmark's intelligence agencies had partnered with the European Defence Research Consortium to build what they called the Helios Array, a network of 32 underground resonance stations stretching from Jutland to the Faroe Islands. These stations were designed to emit controlled counterfrequencies capable of canceling out the mysterious pulse that now enveloped the entire region. But there was a problem. When the first test activation of the array was conducted on October 15th, the effect was immediate. The pulse briefly weakened across Denmark. Power grids stabilized. Electronic interference vanished. Yet, in the same moment, emergency services across multiple towns began receiving frantic calls. People were collapsing. Their skin temperature dropped by several degrees. Heart monitors displayed erratic waveforms, not cardiac rhythms, but patterns identical to the pulse's modulation. It was as if the signal had been living inside them. Meanwhile, hospitals in Aalborg, Aarhus, and Odense reported an alarming trend. Patients in comas began speaking in their sleep, synchronized murmurs, low and rhythmic. When audio engineers enhanced recordings of these murmurs, they realized it wasn't random noise. It was a response to the Helios countersignal. The light was not meant to divide. The phrase echoed through encrypted communication channels as officials scrambled to interpret it. Some believed it was a metaphor, that humanity had interfered with something far beyond its understanding. Others believed it was literal, that the pulse was a unifying network of consciousness, and the Helios counterfrequency had broken the link between two merging worlds. The truth was more complex. Dr. Elena Nørgaard, the lead scientist overseeing the Helios project, was one of the few who questioned the plan's foundation. While reviewing the energy telemetry from the Helios array, she discovered faint feedback waves coming from beneath the stations, as if something underground was echoing their signal back. That echo wasn't random. It contained information. When decoded, the reflected waveform produced repeating geometric patterns: tetrahedrons, hexagons, and fractal spirals resembling those seen in the vanished civilians' biometric scans. It appeared that the Earth itself was responding to the Helios emission like a massive antenna. Elena submitted her findings to the Defense Council. The next morning, she was reassigned to Biological Communications Research, an isolated facility beneath Copenhagen's University Hospital. There, she was instructed to study what the government now called the integrated. The integrated were the survivors, individuals who had vanished during blackout events, but mysteriously reappeared days or weeks later, often miles from where they disappeared. They were alive, coherent, but changed. Elena's first subject was a fisherman named Lars Grunwald, who vanished from Løkken in early September and was found wandering outside Odense nearly a month later. His eyes shimmered faintly in low light, reflecting wavelengths beyond the visible spectrum. MRI scans showed that parts of his neural cortex emitted weak electromagnetic fields, synchronized with the pulse frequency. When Elena spoke to him, he didn't remember disappearing. He only remembered a place without sound and a sky made of glass that reflected itself. When she played him a recording of the pulse, Lars reacted instantly. His pupils dilated, his pulse synchronized perfectly with the signal, and he began whispering words in an unknown language. A linguistic algorithm later revealed that the words were a near match for Proto-Nordic, a language that hadn't been spoken in over 2,000 years. The translation of his sentence was simple, but chilling. They are beneath the light, waiting for the rest to awaken. By late October, the Danish government had expanded Helios beyond national control. The European Union formed a secret coalition named Aegis Directive, merging resources from France, Germany, and the UK. Their plan was to amplify the Helios counterwave across the North Atlantic to permanently erase the pulse's presence. But inside the Helios command room, Elena had begun noticing a secondary phenomenon. The more power they pushed into the array, the stronger the pulse became in areas outside the coverage zone. It was adapting, growing, learning. One midnight, while analyzing live frequency data, Elena's console glitched. For precisely 9 seconds, her monitors went black. Then a single line of text appeared in white. "Hello, Elena." Moments later, all systems returned to normal. Her colleagues found no record of the anomaly in the logs. That night, she received a call from an untraceable number. The voice on the other end was calm, quiet, and eerily familiar. "You can't cancel the light," it said. "You can only become part of it." The call ended. Elena traced the timestamp. The call originated from inside one of the Helios stations. But that facility had been sealed since the day of the first pulse. Every person stationed there was presumed dead. 2 days later, reconnaissance drones near Aalborg captured shocking images. Where the main Helios hub had once stood, a massive circular depression had formed, glassed, smooth, and glowing faintly from within. The drone's thermal cameras detected movement deep beneath the surface, rhythmic pulses that matched human heartbeats. Hundreds of them. Then the ground trembled. A colossal surge of electromagnetic energy erupted from the site, disabling the drones instantly. Witnesses reported seeing multiple columns of light rising into the sky, forming a network that stretched toward the stratosphere, like threads weaving a web of illumination. At that moment, every Helios station across Scandinavia received the same incoming signal. The data packet contained no words, no code, only an image, a map of Denmark, marked with thousands of faint dots. Each dot corresponded to a missing person. Then, one by one, the dots began to glow. Panic spread through government channels. Military command ordered immediate evacuation of all Helios sites. But before they could execute, power grids collapsed nationwide. The pulse surged to maximum amplitude, penetrating every layer of communication. Radios, TVs, phones, all emitted the same haunting frequency. In homes, in cars, in hospitals, people began hearing whispers again, the same voice repeating, "The bridge is complete. You divided the light. Now it will divide you." Cities went dark. The night sky above Denmark flickered with strange auroras, ribbons of light forming hexagonal patterns that rotated slowly, methodically. Satellites observing from orbit captured an even more disturbing image. A faint, circular structure forming above the entire region, miles wide, resembling a massive lens. It wasn't coming down. It was forming around. Inside Reagan Vest, chaos erupted. Defense Minister Enevoldsen ordered the Helios array to go critical. A last resort failsafe meant to burn out every resonant transmitter in the network and permanently sever the link between the pulse and Earth. Elena tried to stop them. She argued that Helios was no longer countering the pulse. It was powering it. Her warnings were ignored. At 02:11 a.m., Helios went into overload. The shockwave was instantaneous. All 32 resonance stations detonated in synchronized bursts. From orbit, the explosions looked like sparks, forming a perfect ring of light across the North Sea basin. But the pulse didn't die. It transformed. For several minutes, the entire sky above Denmark turned into a sheet of shimmering glass. Reflections appeared where there should have been none. Buildings reflecting themselves, oceans reflecting the clouds above, as though reality had become a hall of mirrors. Then, the reflections started to move independently. Eyewitnesses in Aalborg and Aarhus described seeing second versions of themselves standing in reflections, staring back with blank expressions before vanishing. Some people tried to record it. None of the footage survived intact. Files became corrupted, overwritten with fragments of unknown binary data. Those who looked into the reflections for too long reportedly began hearing whispers from their own voices. The integration phenomenon had begun. When dawn broke, parts of Denmark were gone, not destroyed, but replaced. Entire neighborhoods now shimmered faintly, as though viewed through heat haze. People walking into those zones vanished instantly, leaving behind faint impressions in the ground. Human silhouettes burned into concrete like flash shadows from an atomic blast. The European Space Agency detected gravitational fluctuations over the region, suggesting that parts of physical space had folded or merged into another dimension. Project Helios was terminated. The Aegis directive was dissolved. But Dr. Elena Nørgaard, presumed missing after the final Helios detonation, transmitted one last encrypted message to a private server 2 days later. The message contained 3 lines. The pulse is not invasion. It's an echo, and the echo is remembering us. Next came the impossible reports. People claiming to see entire cities reflected in the clouds, ghostly versions of Copenhagen and Aarhus floating upside down in the sky. The reflections flickered whenever the pulse frequency spiked. That was when NATO officially sealed Denmark's borders, calling the region Zone Delta. To the rest of the world, Denmark had vanished behind a communication blackout. But inside the shimmering boundary, those who remained described nights filled with whispers, voices calling out from reflections, asking for help, asking to be remembered. And deep beneath the North Sea, seismic sensors detected movement, massive, rhythmic, and alive. Something was still building the bridge. By the time the calendar turned to February, the once bustling towns across Jutland had begun to look like hollow shells of themselves. Windows were boarded, curtains drawn, and entire blocks stood empty. abandoned overnight by families who had simply packed up and fled without waiting for answers. But those who remained began to realize that escape was no longer an option. Whatever had descended upon Denmark wasn't confined to one area. It was spreading, and its presence was no longer limited to the skies. The first reports of ground-level encounters came from Aalborg. A woman named Clara Nielsen, who worked night shifts at a textile plant, told authorities she had seen a metallic shimmer hovering over the canal near her route home. Thinking it was a drone, she took out her phone to record. But the instant her camera focused, her screen froze. A second later, every streetlight in the area flickered and died, plunging the entire stretch into darkness. She remembered hearing footsteps, soft, rhythmic, deliberate, and a faint clicking sound, like metal tapping on asphalt. When she turned, she caught a glimpse of something tall and smooth-surfaced, reflecting faint moonlight before it slid behind a building. Moments later, her phone rebooted itself, displaying a timestamp 27 minutes ahead of what it should have been. She swore she hadn't blacked out, but the GPS data suggested she'd been standing completely still for nearly half an hour. Clara's story made it to a local radio host, who aired it during a late-night segment. The episode went viral within days, sparking hundreds of similar confessions. A fisherman from Vejle claimed he'd seen beams of cold light reaching into the water. A farmer near Holstebro found a herd of cattle mutilated. No blood, no tracks, just circular burns on the grass, and a silence that hung like lead. Investigators who arrived hours later found their magnetic compasses spinning uncontrollably. By this point, the Danish Emergency Management Agency quietly began enforcing curfews under the guise of increased security. Black government SUVs appeared in villages where they were never seen before. Military-grade radars were deployed across rural areas, their operators speaking in English-accented Danish. At the same time, satellite imaging data from EUMETSAT, the European Weather Satellite Service, began showing static shadows over the North Sea that didn't correspond to any weather pattern or ship movement. The official explanation was technical calibration anomalies. But deep inside a lab beneath Copenhagen University, astrophysicist Dr. Elias Brandt had begun compiling evidence that suggested something far darker. He had cross-referenced seismic disturbances, atmospheric density fluctuations, and heat signatures captured by the Himawari 9 satellite. His findings hinted at enormous, non-aerodynamic structures submerged beneath the continental shelf of the North Sea. These objects, roughly triangular in formation, appeared to emit weak but consistent electromagnetic pulses every 93 minutes, synchronized perfectly with the exact time the Denmark UFO outbreak had first been detected. Elias brought his data to a closed scientific forum, expecting ridicule. Instead, silence filled the virtual room. After a long pause, one of the scientists, a geologist from Norway, finally spoke up. "You're not the only one seeing this," he said. "We've had entire monitoring buoys go offline near the trench. Divers sent to check on them haven't returned." That same week, a chilling video surfaced on a Danish darknet forum. Grainy thermal footage showing what appeared to be humanoid heat signatures moving along the coastline. Except they were cold. In the infrared spectrum, they showed up as shadows of negative temperature, walking upright through fog. The footage ended abruptly when the cameraman gasped and dropped his equipment. Authorities never identified him. By March, the disappearances had reached alarming numbers. Entire busloads of tourists traveling near Aarhus simply never arrived at their destinations. Their GPS trackers showed them driving into rural areas, then vanishing mid-route. No tire marks, no wreckage, no signal recovery. It was as though the vehicles had been erased. When pressure mounted, the Danish Ministry of Defense finally held a closed-door press briefing. No media cameras were allowed. Only transcripts were later leaked. The official standing at the podium was Major Christopher Dahl, who looked visibly shaken as he read from prepared notes. "We have confirmed the presence of unknown aerial and subsurface anomalies," he said, his voice trembling. "The phenomena are being monitored under NATO coordination. Civilian safety remains our highest priority." Then he looked up, paused, and uttered something that wasn't T in his script. "If you are near the coast, do not look at the water at night." That line was later scrubbed from the official transcript. Meanwhile, the European Space Agency, ESA, began quietly removing archived satellite imagery of Denmark's west coast from public access. Analysts on Reddit noticed that certain timestamps from the days following the UFO outbreak had been deleted entirely, especially those showing energy fluctuations over Skagen and Thisted. Attempts to mirror the datasets resulted in server rejections with classified data warnings. As panic grew, a Danish investigative journalist named Fredrik Madsen decided to dig deeper. He traced emergency call patterns, curfew timings, and naval patrol routes. The map he compiled revealed a chilling pattern. Every major disappearance occurred within a 40-kilometer radius of specific points along the coastline, points that formed a perfect equilateral triangle centered over the North Sea. When he plotted the data into GIS software, the triangle overlapped precisely with the coordinates of Elias Brandt's underwater readings. Fredrik tried to contact Brandt for confirmation. The email bounced. Then his phone went dead. 3 days later, his apartment was found empty. His computer had been wiped. By mid-April, a strange radio frequency began to spread across Denmark's shortwave bands. A deep, rhythmic hum that repeated every 93 minutes, exactly in sync with Brandt's earlier observations. Amateur radio operators who tried to triangulate the source reported distortion that intensified near bodies of water. A few who went to investigate described feeling watched before losing consciousness. One man, a seasoned radio hobbyist, woke up 12 hours later lying on the beach, his shoes and watch missing, and his radio equipment completely melted. The pattern was unmistakable. Every attempt to uncover the truth ended in disappearance or silence. Yet the phenomenon itself was becoming impossible to contain. Weather balloons malfunctioned, airliners diverted their routes, and fishermen refused to sail after sundown. Even Denmark's most skeptical citizens began to admit something unprecedented was happening, something not of human origin. As the world's attention shifted elsewhere, to politics, economics, and the noise of daily news, Denmark faded from the headlines. But those living along its coasts knew the truth. The UFO outbreak had not ended. It had evolved. Every night, the tide brought with it strange glimmers, shapes that pulsed faintly just beneath the surface. And when the wind was still, one could hear a low, vibrating tone rising from the water, like the hum of something vast and patient waiting beneath the waves. And that was when the disappearances began to accelerate. Families missing, children gone, entire households reduced to silence. The UFOs had come and gone, but whatever they left behind had decided to stay. By late April, the entire western coast of Denmark had become an unspoken quarantine zone. Officially, it was due to unusual geological instability following seismic disturbances offshore. Unofficially, locals knew the truth. The land itself had gone silent. No birds, no waves, no insects, just an oppressive hum that seemed to crawl beneath the skin. Fishermen who once made their living in the North Sea now refused to even approach the docks after dark. Their boats sat tethered, rocking softly in the mist, as though something unseen brushed against their hulls from below. Inside Copenhagen's National Data Center, an emergency network of defense analysts, astrophysicists, and intelligence officers had been meeting every night under a project codenamed Operation Mirage. Their mission was simple, but terrifying: to determine what exactly had taken root beneath the North Sea. For weeks, they monitored energy spikes, seismic patterns, and electromagnetic distortions that seemed to emanate from a single epicenter roughly 120 kilometers offshore. The data showed an anomaly so vast that no natural phenomenon could explain it. A pulsating energy field stretching nearly 30 kilometers across, moving slowly eastward toward the Danish mainland. The lead analyst, Dr. Lene Thorsen, noticed something strange. The pulses followed a mathematical rhythm. Not random, not chaotic. Each spike occurred in perfect intervals, echoing prime number sequences, signals too structured to be anything but intentional. When she ran the frequency patterns through an acoustic analyzer, a haunting result emerged. It resembled a form of modulated communication. Something, some intelligence, was sending a structured signal from beneath the sea. She presented her findings to military command in total secrecy. The response was immediate and severe. NATO vessels began converging on the area under the guise of a maritime exercise. Civilian radar frequencies were jammed, flight routes diverted, and satellite feeds restricted. But before the blackout was complete, a few amateur astronomers managed to capture infrared images of the region. The pictures showed something unbelievable. 3 enormous heat signatures, triangular in formation, rising slowly toward the surface. Hours later, seismic stations across Denmark registered an undersea event of extraordinary magnitude. For 47 seconds, the ground itself trembled. The hum that locals had reported for weeks suddenly spiked in pitch, becoming a deafening resonance that shattered glass along the coast. Then, just as abruptly, it stopped. In the following hours, every communication device within 50 kilometers of the North Sea began malfunctioning. Phones displayed random symbols. Radios emitted static that seemed to whisper beneath the noise. Car engines stalled, compasses spun, and drones fell from the sky. A fisherman in Tiburon reported seeing a column of light, like a beam from the ocean to the clouds. Moments before every light in his village went out. By morning, the Danish government declared a state of emergency, citing national security reasons. Entire coastal regions were evacuated. Residents were relocated inland with no explanation, their belongings left behind. Soldiers in unmarked uniforms patrolled empty streets, their radios silent, their expressions hollow. Meanwhile, scientists inside Operation Mirage discovered something deeply unsettling. When analyzing the timing of the last seismic event, they noticed an exact correlation with fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field recorded in other parts of the world. It was as if whatever was beneath Denmark's coast had resonated with the planet itself. An electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to be detected across continents. At the same time, reports began flooding in from neighboring countries. Fishermen along the Norwegian and Scottish coasts described seeing glowing patterns moving beneath the water, like veins of light pulsing outward. In Germany, radar installations near the North Sea began showing impossible reflections, metallic echoes that shifted and reappeared in geometric formations. NATO scrambled jets, but none of the pilots saw anything on visual range. Their instruments, however, recorded bursts of low-frequency sound that made their aircraft vibrate uncontrollably. Back in Copenhagen, a whistleblower from within Operation Mirage leaked classified footage to a small European news outlet. The video, shaky and partially corrupted, appeared to show a massive black structure rising momentarily from the sea before submerging again. The shape was unlike any known craft. Smooth, angular, and seemingly alive, as if the metal itself was pulsing. Just before the feed cut, the audio captured a voice shouting, "It's transmitting again!" The leak spread across the internet in hours. The government immediately denied its authenticity, but digital forensic experts verified the metadata. It had indeed originated from inside the defense network. Within a day, the video was removed from every major platform. Those who had reposted it reported being contacted by security consultants, advising them to delete the footage or face legal consequences. But the story was already out. Independent investigators, conspiracy researchers, and even respected physicists began piecing together fragments of the truth. The triangular formations, the synchronized pulses, the vanishing civilians, it all pointed to something deliberate, possibly an attempt to communicate or terraform the environment. Some theorized it was an ancient structure reactivating after centuries of dormancy, triggered by human interference. Others believed it was the beginning of a full-scale occupation unfolding beneath the waves. As panic grew, the world's attention finally turned toward Denmark. Major news outlets demanded transparency. The Prime Minister held a televised address, his tone grave. "There have been unusual occurrences," he admitted, "but we are working closely with our allies to ensure safety." His eyes, however, betrayed the truth. Wide, restless, haunted. When the broadcast ended, footage leaked showing him being escorted from the podium by armed guards. That same night, a Danish surveillance satellite captured its final transmission. A wide-angle view of the North Sea glowing faintly from within. The ocean itself seemed to shimmer, as if something vast beneath it was stirring. Moments later, the feed cut out, and the satellite went dark. The following morning, coastal radar systems detected movement, a slow, deliberate shift in the anomalies' position. Whatever it was moving inland. And then, the disappearances began again. Entire towns went silent overnight. Streets full of cars with doors open, food half-eaten on tables, televisions still flickering with static. No struggle, no noise, no trace, just absence. In one village, a security camera recorded the last seconds before vanishing. A man stepping into the street, looking upward, and then his image dissolving into distortion, as though the pixels themselves were erased. The hum returned, louder than ever before. But this time, it wasn't just coming from the sea. It was resonating from beneath the ground, from the air itself. It was everywhere. And the realization dawned on those who still remained. Whatever came to Denmark had not left. It had taken root. Something ancient, intelligent, and beyond comprehension was no longer observing. It was adapting. It was preparing. By the first week of May, Denmark was no longer recognizable. Entire provinces had gone dark. Satellite imagery showed nothing but black patches where once there were cities. Every major data center, substation, and military outpost within a 200-kilometer radius of the North Sea was offline. What little information leaked out came from shortwave transmissions. Frantic voices of operators and civilians alike, each repeating the same message before being swallowed by static. They're not ships, they're openings. The rest of Europe was watching closely, yet powerless to intervene. NATO vessels stationed in the North Sea reported instruments behaving as though the ocean itself were alive. Sonar reflections rising and falling in slow rhythmic waves, like breathing. Every attempt to approach the epicenter ended the same way. Blackouts, fried electronics, and disoriented crews claiming they'd lost time. One destroyer, the HMS Falcon, returned to port after only 6 hours at sea. Its crew reported that their clocks no longer matched the world's time. They were 5 hours ahead, though no one could explain how. In a fortified bunker beneath the outskirts of Copenhagen, the remnants of Operation Mirage worked in near darkness. Dr. Lena Thorsen and her remaining team had managed to keep one of the deep-sea sensors operational by isolating it from all global networks. What they saw horrified them. The anomaly had grown exponentially. It was no longer a localized pulse. It had become a structure, stretching hundreds of kilometers beneath the seafloor. In its center was a void, an impossible absence of measurable matter. Lena's assistant, Eric Johansson, overlaid the data with geological maps and made a chilling discovery. The pattern of the void mirrored the coastline itself, as though something beneath the earth had molded the land into its shape long ago. "This isn't new," Eric whispered. "It's been here, waiting." Moments later, the lights flickered. Every monitor in the bunker displayed a repeating pattern. 4 vertical lines, then 3 dots, then silence. The same sequence repeated over and over, cycling faster each time. Lena stared at it, realization dawning. It wasn't random. It was a countdown. Outside, the skies over Jutland began to change. What at first looked like an aurora soon became a rolling curtain of metallic light, bending and rippling as though reflecting an unseen world above. Airliners diverted hundreds of kilometers off course as their compasses failed. Farmers described seeing columns of liquid silver rising from the soil, flickering like static before vanishing. Birds no longer flew. Cows stood motionless, their eyes glazed, oriented toward the north, as though drawn by some invisible force. At 3:07 a.m. local time, every seismograph in Europe lit up. The pulse came again, stronger, slower, and unmistakably deliberate. The hum that had haunted the coasts for months reached an unbearable pitch. It wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration in the bones, a resonance that made glass, metal, even human voices quiver. In the final transmission from Operation Mirage, recorded moments before total communication loss, Lane's voice could be heard. "It's not an invasion. It's synchronization. The field isn't expanding outward. It's folding us inward." Then silence, a perfect sphere of white brilliance pulsing every 6 seconds. Then, without warning, the glow imploded, leaving only darkness. Across Europe, magnetic compasses realigned by several degrees. GPS networks recalibrated automatically, as though the planet's axis had subtly shifted. The following morning, military aircraft sent to survey the region reported clear skies and calm seas, as if nothing had ever happened. But Denmark's western coastline was different. Satellite topography revealed a new depression, nearly 50 kilometers wide, where land had simply lowered. Villages once nestled along the coast were gone, not destroyed, not flooded, just missing. The terrain was smooth, seamless, as though it had been erased and rewritten. No human life was ever found in the affected zones. Only traces, personal effects, melted vehicles, fingerprints embedded in walls that now led nowhere. The Danish government declared the region permanently restricted, cordoned off by international mandate. Maps were redrawn, and the world moved on, or pretended to, but whispers persisted. Deep space observatories reported faint radio signals emanating not from the sea, but from orbit, echoing the same rhythm Dr. Thorsen had recorded before the blackout. 4 lines, 3 dots, then silence. Months later, a research vessel operating in the Norwegian Sea detected a massive thermal anomaly deep below the continental shelf, far from the Danish coast. The ocean floor there had begun to shift, forming slow-moving patterns that looked eerily familiar. When the data was transmitted to the mainland, a single encrypted message returned automatically from an unknown source. The process has only begun. To this day, no one knows what truly happened beneath the North Sea. Governments deny, satellites conceal, and those who search too deeply vanish into bureaucratic silence. But among the fishermen of Jutland, an old saying has returned, whispered only at night, when the wind carries that faint electric hum across the waves. They came from the deep not to visit, but to reclaim. And every time the horizon glows faintly with that impossible silver hue, the people of Denmark remember. The disappearances were never random. They were the first step in something far larger, a quiet rewriting of the world itself.